Hey, how you doing? Episode 22 of the brilliantly titled NOTCAST, he said, very, very modestly indeed. So it's Saturday, 21st of November, 2020. Still in lockdown. Everything is shut out there, apart from Boots and what they call essential shops. Some places like to think of themselves as essential. Now, I think record shops are pretty essential to my continued survival on the planet. Not everybody agrees with me, but as you've noticed, I am a lone voice in the wilderness. I think records are as important as food, although I can't try to eat a record. So today we're going to talk about almost like a sequel stroke continuation of what I discussed yesterday. Now, I'm doing these somewhat on a daily basis on the grounds that the television is absolutely appalling. So as I record this, it is about 4 o'clock on a Saturday afternoon. And Saturday afternoon television generally has two things. It either has sport or it has old films. Today, it's sport on 3 channels out of the 4 main terrestrial channels. And then the other one is a show called, I think, Escape to the Country, where people go and buy old tat and then sell it at auction houses. It's bizarre, especially considering the weather's pretty rubbish out there. And I think there's sport on BBC One, ITV, and Channel 4. Now, anybody that thinks that sport is not important is wrong. But sport gets a preferential treatment compared to the arts. You know, if it was up to me, 3 channels would be the arts. One would be somebody playing music, probably crappy old blues rock if you're on Sky Arts, because they're always showing Gary Moore and bands like Deep Purple and stuff like that. Another one would be, let's just have a classic movie channel. And I can't believe the quality of television that we're seeing at the moment during lockdown. If there's no new stuff to show and there's no new stuff to make, there's plenty of old stuff out there. The BBC have huge archives going back to the 1930s, and why not repeat some of that stuff instead of showing the same old endless episodes of game shows and The Simpsons and whatever? Wouldn't it be nice? I know they do it on BBC 4 on Fridays where they show, one episode of Top of the Pot from 30 years ago. Surely it would be cheap stroke free to repeat original classic Doctor Who, original classic stuff. Hell, start EastEnders from the beginning and show a 1984 EastEnders on a Tuesday afternoon or a Saturday afternoon or something, so people can at least catch up and see where it is. And you can't buy EastEnders on DVD. I mean, the box set would be bigger than my house. And that I'd never have the time to watch that. Although I did notice, actually, season 1 of EastEnders did stop when the lockdown happened. And now season 2 has picked it up, but they haven't managed to get the plots any more convincing or any better. Most of the people that are on Walford Square are miserable or complete Gilberts and Dick Noshes, and I don't like any of them at all. They're the kind of people that if I met and hung around with them, I'd be like, like sometimes you meet people and you go, I don't like you, dude. You're a bit of an idiot. And you go, right, okay, I'm just going to move out of the square. So if I was on EastEnders, I'd be in it for about 6 weeks, and I'd be like, this square's made out of wrong'uns and murderers. I'm going. Now, at one point, and there's an awful lot of murder and an awful lot of crime that happens in Walford, and what they really need to do is they go, look, this place is like the crime capital of the world. It's worse than Brazil. I mean, did you know that I think Brookside Close, when Brookside was on television, Brookside had the highest murder rate of anywhere in the world when that was on TV. And, Walford and EastEnders has gone much more, aggressive, violent and murdery than even Brookside. Ridiculous. And so therefore I have banished myself to my man cave, where I'm surrounded by all my lovely music, and I'm going to talk about that instead of saying about how actually if I was on EastEnders I'd just nick the whole square. I'd love the police to just turn up to a massive sting operation and go, you're all nicked, and then take them all down to the station, and then they'll be banged up in chokey forever because they're all criminals and wrong'uns and bad uns. Yes indeed. And my best way of remaining calm, lucid and not arrested is by not hanging around in Walford. By the way, if you want to look up Walford on Google Street View, you can see it, and it's quite interesting. if you're into weird geeky stuff. Although obviously you might end up falling down a Google sightseeing hole, and then you might end up going and watching lots of episodes of Abandoned Engineering, and then all of a sudden we're back into the hunt for Hitler's Nazi gold train as per episode 1. So there's a callback. You see, I'm doing a bit of foreshadowing and a callback. In drama, there's a theory called Chekhov's gun, which is if you put the gun on the table, you've got to be prepared to shoot it in the third act of the play. Well, I dropped some gold dust back in episode 1 with the hunt for Hitler's Nazi gold train, and I'm bringing it straight back up. But let's not worry too much about that. So eventually, instead of waffling and I talk like I'm paid by the word, we're going to talk about a recently released Tangerine Dream box set, which is called Pilots of Purple Twilight, which came out, I think, last month. And this is pretty expensive. It's pretty definitive. It's not perfect, and I'm going to go through it alongside the other stuff that the band were putting out. So the first part, we talked about the In Search of Hades set, which was 18 discs, which took us up from the Virgin years from 1973 through to 1979. This is a really good place to start because this is the start of the new decade. It covers a much smaller time period. It covers 3 years instead of 6 years. And this is also a much smaller set, so it's only 10 discs. And I think they could really have plumped this out, this disc set, and made it perhaps a little bit more substantial. So first and foremost, the first thing that it's missing is a live album, which is called Pergamon on CD. It was called Quichotte originally, which is a phrase which I've never been able to pronounce correctly. Now, this was recorded in Berlin in January 1980 at the start of the new decade with a new lineup. Johannes Schmoling had joined the group. And I think a condition of the concert was that they would play behind the Berlin Wall in communist Germany because they played instrumental music. It wasn't political. There was nothing in the message, nothing in the lyrics that could be seen to be in any way revolutionary and threatening the communist state. Obviously, they took the singer Paul Robeson, I think it was his name, and they broke his fingers, so he couldn't play guitar when in, I think, places like Chile, for example. But because Tangerine Dream were instrumental, there was no revolutionary content. They didn't even have songs called, Worker Meet Parasite, Unite and Overthrow the communist system, All Pigs Are Equal, but some pigs are more equal than others, Stalin Must Die. None of those songs were Tangerine Dream songs, so it was okay for them to play behind the Berlin Wall. And this album is not on the box sets. There's a reason being is that it was licensed to an East German label. It was only released in I think East Germany and behind the Berlin Wall, and it wasn't released officially in Western civilization until 1986. Originally it was called Quichotte, and I think it had a picture of some kind of orange blob, maybe even an orange itself on there. This was reissued in 1986 on CD. It was slightly reconfigured, slightly remixed. And the band, like all their live albums, went back into the studio and tweaked a few bits and took a couple of minutes out and changed some of the transitions. And it's got 2 sidelong compositions on it called Quichotte Part 1 and Quichotte Part 2. It should be on the box set. It was recorded at the time that the band were under contract to Virgin, but it wasn't released on Virgin due to blah 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 contractual reasons. And contractual reasons are obviously the reason why some things just don't happen. Really good. If you like Tangerine Dream from this era, by the way, this is a really good live album to pick up and to get. So well worth getting, but not on the box set. So let's go into the box set and see what there is. As you will notice, I have carefully cut round the shrink wrap so that I don't take the sticker off. One of the things with stickers is that it's really difficult to take stickers off the covers and to keep them on records, especially if the sticker says pay no more than $2.99. This wasn't $2.99, by the way. So the first album on here. So standard approach, Pilots of Purple Twilight. Here's a fancy book with some pictures of the band and some interesting, or allegedly interesting, biographical information, data, pictures of them hanging around in studios. Lots of moustaches in a built-up area. Some interesting shots of them playing live. There's a dearth of decent live video footage of the band in this era. alongside some other stuff that we've got. So each album gets a chapter, and each chapter is kind of discusses the band and the period and the work that they were doing, and so on and so forth. Now there's some omissions as we go through this set. I'm going to pick those up as I go along. But first and foremost, let's start with discs 1 to 5 in this here. Again, if you're interested in an affordable entry point for the band, buy the Virgin Years box sets. They're about £10.50 each on Amazon, that contain the officially released studio and live album series. At the time, considerably cheaper, and you get pretty much all of the stuff. So first things first about this set. It doesn't feature any Stephen Wilson remixes. It doesn't feature any 5-1 remixes. It's very scant in terms of previously unreleased live material. It really does miss out a fair chunk of stuff. So you could have easily made this up to maybe an 18 or a 22 disc set, and have been just as complete while covering the same time period. So the first album that was released that's covered under this disc 1 is Tangram. Tangram was released here in the definitive edition on CD in 1995, vinyl edition from 1980. We're going to quickly open that and see, just check something that we've got on there. So the labels that we've got on the CDs, by the way, replicate the labels that we've got on the albums. And I love this little image here. If you're going to get a Tangerine Dream tattoo, God, don't do that, please. But if you are, get the logo that's on this, because it's the best one. Also, it looks a bit like something out of the Transformers. So if you don't want to reveal that you're into, synthy prog rock type German bleepy music, you can always pretend it's a Transformer. What was it? Oh yeah, it's Oedipus Tyrannus. Who's that? Yeah, don't ask any more questions. Certainly couldn't be more embarrassing than the Transformers films that were made by Michael Bay. And the Transformers films made by Michael Bay are absolute dog shit. I think I'm contractually obliged to use the phrase absolute dog shit at least once in every one of these videos, but I tell it like I see it, and those Transformers films are awful. So Tangram here, again, 2 side-long tracks, really. I love them. I think they're great. I think Tangerine Dream are at their best when they're doing 20-25 minute side-long songs, which have a number of parts and pieces that are all seamlessly melded together to somehow create one whole. They're sonic epics, very reminiscent, as I said yesterday, of Pink Floyd album-length tracks like Atom Heart Mother and Echoes, where the song moves and undulates and it goes through variations and permutations of the sound. And I think Johannes Schmoling really had brought a new technological view to the band. So obviously Peter Baumann had left, Klaus Kruger had left, Steve Joliffe had left, stroke fired, thank God, because I would have just stopped buying Tangerine Dream albums if he'd carried on singing his awful bullshit on them. But Johannes had, was a sound engineer at a Berlin concert hall, and also very interested in things like sequencers. And he really brought some very interesting approaches to rhythms, textures, and sounds around that. So I think this period is peak Tangerine Dream, completely the classic years by any stretch of the imagination. And Tangram contains, a number of pieces in there that are brilliant instrumental epics that really kind of defined the band's sound. And if you think, well, what does Tangerine Dream sound like? You're thinking about stuff that Johannes Schmoling has played on. You're thinking about stuff like Beach Scene from Thief. You're thinking about Through Metamorphic Rocks, which is from the album that immediately precedes this one. You're thinking about that type of stuff, where we're almost like the soundtrack to exploring inner space. Now that sounds very pretentious, and I should probably go in Sude's corner on Melody Maker, apart from the fact that Melody Maker doesn't exist anymore. But Tangram is a great record, and it was followed up in 1982, I think, by the soundtrack to Thief, which is disc 2 on here. No, it was released in March 1981. Now this contains a bonus track. It contains a remix of Dr. Destructo. Again, like all of their soundtrack works, it was largely recorded separate from watching the film, but also it was then re-edited and recreated to be more digestible in album format. This is one of their best albums, absolutely incontrovertibly probably my top 3 Tangerine Dream albums, if I have to pick a top 3. It's the nuts, it really is. And it's got probably one of their best songs on it, which is Beach Theme. And there's a side 2 has a track called Beach Scene, which is a remix and re-recording of Beach Theme, but with extra drums, which the band didn't really approve, but was put on by the director Michael Mann to make it fit into the sonic textures of the film. Now, as we'll see, here's the definitive edition on CD from 1995. Like a lot of the definitive editions, there are some errors on this. Primarily, Peter Bowman is mentioned as one of the members on the back. He had left the group long before this. It also mentions on the side that it's Tangerine Dream Live. It isn't, it's a soundtrack album. Now, this is the kind of sloppy lack of attention to detail that somehow people think they can still charge us full price for it, but they can give us a below par product. Again, if you want to get these albums, buy the Tangerine Dream Virgin Years cheap box sets that are about £10 for 5 or 7 albums, for example, on Amazon. Vinyl copies of these generally really affordable, really cheap, you know, £4 or £5 online. Normally most people have the full set, so I've been buying quite a few of these during lockdown because I haven't been going to gigs, I haven't been spending my gig money, so I've been turning it into music money, and I've been buying the albums that I had when I was a teenager. I had all of this stuff when I was a teenager. I bought it again recently for 2 reasons. One, because I could. Secondly, because I can't go to gigs anymore, so I'm going to invest time in the past as opposed to think about a future or a current that I'm not really existing in. And the third one is, I bloody miss them. I traded these in so I could go and buy Pet Shop Boys 12 Inches and Iron Maiden albums, and now I'm at the point where I don't have to trade records in to be able to buy the other records, so I can buy these records, and they're cheaper now than they were when they came out. Thief is a great album. It's a series of 8 fantastic songs that explore a set of themes. They're designed for the soundtrack for a really good Michael Mann film, which is a crime thriller from 1981, probably a cult one. This film kind of had a bit of a tortured birth. It was released as Violent Streets in the UK. It was released as Thief in America. The home VHS versions of it were called Thief, and it's a good crime movie of its time. And it also has on it, by the way, I mentioned Through Metamorphic Rocks as one of the classic Tangerine Dream tracks that you have probably heard. There's a re-recorded, remixed and rearranged version of it called Igneous that's on this. It's absolutely great. Now, they've corrected the track listing because the American version of Thief has a track called Confrontation on it, which was not recorded by Tangerine Dream but included on the soundtrack album, because in America it was a soundtrack album and not a Tangerine Dream album. The track Confrontation sounds so much like Pink Floyd. I would sue if I was Pink Floyd, but since I'm not, I won't. Google it. Craig Safan recorded it. It's called Confrontation. The director of the film, Michael Mann, plays guitar on the track. It's really good, but doesn't sound anything like this, but it's in the movie as well. So that's Thief. That's the second disc. Third disc is Exit. Now, Exit was released 1981 as well, and it was recorded and mixed June-July 1981. Thief was February 1981. So again, the band were powering this stuff out, 3 albums a year. And the configuration that we had, Johann Schmoling was not slacking off at this point, working at full speed alongside the other members of the band. Some fantastic tracks on here. It's got Chronozon, which is brilliant. Exit. I mean, this is just a classic Tangerine Dream album, full of stonkers, really good. Also, as I've mentioned before, definitive 1995 CD edition. Does again credit Peter Baumann on the back, but he'd left the band about 4 years before that had come out. And again, if you look at the spine on the definitive edition, it says that it's Tangerine Dream Live. It's not live. It's sloppy proofreading, and you know, somewhat oddly, the album that is Tangerine Dream Live, which is Pergamon, doesn't have Tangerine Dream Live on the side. All these albums, by the way, have been sympathetically remastered. They've never sounded better on CD than these editions. Now, the fourth album on the 10-disc set is White Eagle. And White Eagle is an interesting record, and I'm not going to pretend that it isn't. This is the vinyl version. What you can start to see, by the way, is that the band was slightly letting go of their ability to present albums in a strong way visually. and that becomes more obvious as we go along. So this has got a couple of great tracks on it. It's got Convention of the 24. It's got the White Eagle title track that was later remixed and put into movie soundtracks. It's got Mojave Plan, which is again a sidelong epic, really brilliant track that really touched into what they were really good at, which was creating sidelong, multi-parted, epic songs. Again, at last on the definitive edition of this, they actually get Hans Smoling's name on it correct for the first time, about 4 albums late, guys, but better late than never. It's a really good album. It's starting to be a little bit poppier. The songs, in some respects, are getting a little bit shorter, a little bit punchier. And that becomes a problem later on in the band's career. But these are just really good, solid songs. And again, well worth getting. Now, disc 5 is the first of the fan bait on this box set. It is The Soldier. So it's a soundtrack album, which for a film called The Soldier, which was recorded in 1981 and 1982. It was mixed in June 1982, and it was not the first thing that they put out that year. And what it is, it's got 15, 16 songs on it, 17 songs. It's got a number of variations on previously released and subsequent material. So, for example, it's got 3 different remixes and re-recordings of a track called Horizon. It's got 2 different versions of a track called Logos, which is their next album. It's got some variations on Down for Dance. It's got a version or a remix of Tangent on there, and it's got start and end titles, and it's got about 8 separate tracks which are called The Soldier. Because it was never, the film didn't do particularly well. The album therefore wasn't released because nobody went to go and see the film. Virgin Records thought there wasn't any commercial potential in that, so the final version of the album was never finished. It was mostly finished. This is the version that was prepared and ready for release, but not the version that ever came out, because it was later released, I think, decades later probably. It's got some fantastic stuff on it. It's really good to get the studio recordings of tracks that appear on Logos, and it's also very good to get some variations. Now, the last 3 tracks on this, which are The Soldier 8, Horizon 3, and End Titles, are each about 7 or 8 minutes long. They peak Tangerine Dream. Absolutely great songs by the band standards. Some of the other ones are maybe 1-2 minutes, atmospheric, somewhat lacking in melody, jingly type things. These last 3 songs are classics of the band's period, but not necessarily ones that you will have known or will have heard. Right, next up, we're going to go into discs 6 to 10. Disc 6 to 10, we have to take a little side detour and go into the extra tracks that are on the White Eagle disc here. So disc 4, White Eagle, is the album itself. It also contains bonus tracks. It contains 6 soundtrack songs which were released as EPs only in Germany and only on vinyl. So on disc 4, and I'm breaking the chronology slightly because the White Eagle tracks were released in May and in May 1982 and May 1983. But then there's not enough of them to justify their own disc. There was a soundtrack to a German TV show, which I think was called Tatort, which had 4 songs in it, which was the title track, which is called Das Mädchen auf der Treppe. I have no idea what that means. Flock, Catcher and Speed. Now, Flock, Catcher and Speed were new songs that the band had been performing live. The title track is a remix of White Eagle, and more correctly, a re-recording. We also have 2 extra songs after that, which is the 7-inch single called Daydream, which was the soundtrack to a TV show called Daydream in Germany. These 6 songs have never been on CD before, and because the 12-inch of Das Mädchen auf der Treppe didn't have a speed on it, some people played it at 33 and some people played it at 45. Apparently it sounds really good at both speeds, which is probably the sign of a really good track. But Daydream and Moorland were only a 7-inch single, only in Germany. never on CD, so it's really good to finally get them in a digital form. But they do sit somewhere in between, so they're pretty rare tracks, and it's good to have them out. Now, Daydream and Moorland also comprised, or were later also used in a film called The Keep, which I'm going to talk about in more detail shortly. The next album, now we're looking at disc 6 to 10. So the two discs that we've got here, discs 6 and 7, are a concert at the London Dominion on the 6th of November 1982. And it's about just under 2 hours long. And it features effectively 90 minutes of new live material, which is on the first part of this and the second part of that, as well as an encore of 3 songs, which are Midnight in Tula, White Eagle, and Dominion. You will go and see them. If you went to see them in 1982, firstly, you lucky bastards. Secondly, there's only 10 minutes of material which you've actually heard previously, which is White Eagle and Midnight in Tula. So you go and see Tangerine Dream, and 90 minutes of the set is brand new material you've never heard before, which is pretty ballsy. So the band recorded the 2 shows at the London Dominion with the aim of releasing a live album. And the live album that came out was called Logos, which is there. It's a classic Tangerine Dream live album. And Logos is, I think, here. CD 8 of the set. Now you think, oh, there's probably some repetition between this and that, and there's repetitions of the material. Well, I'm going to talk about Logos, and I'm going to come back to Dominion to explain why that isn't probably the case. So whenever they released a live album, and this is again the 1995 definitive edition on CD, the band would go back into the studio, they'd revise, re-record some of the material, they'd edit it down, they'd change some of the solos, they'd change some of the transitions so that it could fit into 2 sides of a vinyl disc. So, for example, remember that the band were playing 90 minutes of new material that was uninterrupted, largely without breaks. So they had to try and think about, well, where do we end the sides on the album, and do we take out sections where there's repetition, because they were performing live and improvising live through some set themes. The band also had points where perhaps they were thought, well, it's gone on for a minute or two too long, or we've gone down an avenue of improvisation that isn't always a success. So every live album, they went in, they remixed, re-recorded parts of it, chopped, changed, and edited it around. Now, most of Logos, for example, side 1 mostly comes from the back 20 minutes of the concert, and most of side 2 comes from the first part. So it's not really a full and accurate live representation. The band also performed 2 sets. They performed a set at 6:15 at night and one at 8:45 at night. So Logos is kind of like a compendium or a best of those 2 shows. So for the 4 hours that they played live, you get less than a quarter of it on Logos. Logos is stonking, and it features, especially towards the end of side 1, some material that they'd recorded in the studio but hadn't really released up until that point. So the Dominion concert that you've got there on 2 discs is effectively a huge chunk of that unreleased performance, which is taken from the 2 performances mixed together, as well as Logos itself being a different version of one of the other shows. So there's little repetition as such. And we've also got CD 9 is one of the last albums on here, which is Hyperborea. And I think what we'd had here is that the band were just really bloody prolific at this point. So Hyperborea was recorded in August 1983 in Berlin, alongside, so at that point in 1983, they'd released the Daydream single, they'd just released the Logos album, which had been recorded the previous November and then remixed in the January. They then went in less than 6 months later with a brand new album called Hyperborea. And Hyperborea here, again, has a side-long track. It has 3 other songs. I think the side 1, let me just quickly check, is No Man's Land, Hyperborea, and Cinnamon Road. And again, they had a side-long track, Sphinx Lightning. Again, huge, lovely, epic. 20 minutes, ideal for powering through spreadsheets on. But what we can see is you start to look at the covers of these, and it feels like the band's starting to lose focus a little bit, because they're so bloody prolific. They haven't got time to sit and to think and to make a concept or an idea that sits alongside it. And I think this is why Tangerine Dream weren't as successful as some other bands because they didn't have that strong visual identity. They didn't have that strong thematic throughput that went through it. Think about some of their contemporaries at the time, and in the same decade, they had strong, focused albums that was made out of the best material that they had. They released an album every year or every 2 years. Tangerine Dream were doing 3 albums a year, and sometimes there were doubles. So sometimes you'd get 3.5 hours of new music every year from them, and sometimes you thought the idea around the song titles or the visuals that the band had was really as quick as going, what should we call this one? Oh, fuck it, let's put 2 words together, let's call it Spinks Lightning. All right, fine, boom, done. And yeah, that's fine, but when you've got 163 albums, you're not going to hit the bullseye every time. And Hyperborea was, I think, one of the first albums where things had started to slip away, I think, a little bit from that. So it started to feel that the band were being very, very prolific. I remember I read an interview, and I think it was with Johannes, where he said that actually Tangerine Dream was more of a company as opposed to a band at that point. And you can really see how someone could think that around them, is that they were a company that was making musical product, and it was good musical product, but what they weren't doing is that they weren't stopping and thinking about what they were doing. There was never a sit down moment where they went, right, what are we going to do next? It was more like, all right, it's Monday. Oh yeah, we could do a film soundtrack, and we could buy some new synthesizers with the money. Yeah, sure. Okay, guys, let's do it. And for example, what we have here actually on this set is we don't just have the Dominion concert that's previously unavailable. We also have the soundtrack to the film Risky Business, which is here. Probably their best known stuff is on the soundtrack to Risky Business. There's The Dream Is Always the Same, and Love on a Real Train. And there's maybe about 15-20 minutes of music on the soundtrack CD. There's about another extra 20 minutes that's actually in the film that's not on the soundtrack. But that's their big hit. If the band has a big hit, it's Love on a Real Train, which is a 3-minute kind of excerpt of material which they were working on elsewhere. And I think The Dream Is Always the Same is effectively a remix and re-recording of the title track of Force Majeure, or one of the sections of those turned into a pop hit. So the band are going back and constantly rethinking, remixing, re-recording old stuff and putting old pictures in new frames. So Pilots of Purple Twilight has those Risky Business tracks on there. And that was released in 1984. I think it came out January 1984. So strictly speaking, outside of the 1983 timescale. CD10 is the big deal for this set. It is the soundtrack for the film The Keep. And I'm not going to make any bones about it. This is the reason why I bought this box set. The Keep is one of my favourite films. It's not a great film, but I love it to bits. And it's this obscure, only available on VHS and Laserdisc Michael Mann movie from 1983, where a bunch of badass German SS guys go into a keep, which is like an abandoned old castle, and then they find out that they're facing off against the embodiment of pure evil itself. So it's got Nazis, it's got ghosts, it's got the Holocaust in it, it's got weird and unusual architecture, it's got a Tangerine Dream soundtrack. It's just full out balls deep batshit crazy movie, and it's not been available on DVD until very, very recently. It was released in Australia in February 2020, over 20 years after the DVD format came out, in a bare bones 2.35 widescreen disc, taken from the trailer that's been used as a streaming version of the film. It's really good, and it's undeservedly lost into history. So much so that when I found out it had been released, I ordered it from Australia within about 20 minutes. It still hasn't arrived, but that's COVID for you. And The Keep, because the film died financially, it was given about 20 different titles. It was never released in the UK to cinemas. It was first released in the UK on VHS. The version of the film that was released was 96 minutes long, and the original director's cut of it was about an hour and a quarter longer. So it's had lots of bits sliced out of it, so you could get more screenings of it at the cinema. But it never made it to the cinema in the UK. I think it was released in France and Germany, and in some cinemas in America. It died on its arse, was a huge commercial failure, and the band had the soundtrack album ready for release, but Virgin Records went, guys, no one's gone to see the film, no one's going to buy the soundtrack album, we're not even going to press it. So this is the first official retail release of the Keep. The band did their own soundtrack release in 1997, which you could buy at concerts. There's a couple of bootleg editions of it that have gone out. I've got one on order which hasn't yet arrived in the post, which I really wanted to show to you. But this is, this is it. This is a completely fully realised, unreleased Tangerine Dream album from the summer of 1983. And some of the motifs that they're using and some of the tracks that they perform on the Keep appear in Logos, but huge chunks of it don't. Is it any good? Probably not. But it's a soundtrack album. It's an unreleased Tangerine Dream album. So there's a couple of things which the band did around about the same time, which aren't on the box set, which should be on the box set. And the first one I'm going to mention is the soundtrack album to a film called Wavelength. The CD of this was mispressed, and very few copies of the CD are playable. So I've got a vinyl edition of this album. Again, this was recorded in 1983 during the Virgin contract. It's not on the box set. I think CDs have been out of print for 25 years of it. It's bloody hard to get. It's quite good, but it's not amazing. It's made out of short 2-3 minute tracks. It was never prepared for an album release. The version of this that's been released is actually just the raw soundtrack cues, so 2-3 minute versions of songs, textures, ambience and themes around there. It's pretty good, but it's not amazing. There's a couple of other soundtrack albums which the band released, but I think I'm going to have to touch upon those on the next video. So I'm going to do a third one which details what happened after the end of the Virgin years. But I mean, really what we've got is, we've got 10 CDs on Pilots of the Purple Twilight, and it really should be more material than that. Flashpoint should be in here, Firestarter should be in here, Quichotte should be in here. I think that there's a number of shows which were officially recorded which should be in here. So for example, the Fassbinder Memorial Concert in 1983, Perth in 1982, Sydney in 1982, Preston in 1980, Paris, a place called Aachen was recorded. So there's plenty of extra material which was recorded during the Virgin period which could be on here, which for some reason isn't, probably contractual. There's an absence of 5/1 mixes because a lot of the original master tapes were lost in the 80s. There's no Stephen Wilson remixes, but there is 2 unreleased albums in terms of The Soldier, which is very good. There's The Keep, which is very good as well. There's an unreleased concert from the Dominion. That's a fabulous 2 hours. And then also there are a number of vinyl only tracks. So there's the EP soundtracks to Tattort and Daydream as well. So if you're a completist, well worth picking up, but it's not the definitive story, not by a long way. And whilst we're talking about the Virgin years, there are some extra material which could be released, which isn't, which was released on this box set, which is called Tangents, which came out in 1994. Heck, you could have repressed Tangents and stuck it in there and put an extra 5 discs in, and you could have taken this out of the second-hand market and you could have plumped up the disc and made it a bit more attractive. Tangents is very controversial. 5 CDs, of which one of those CDs is completely unreleased, and 3 of those CDs are almost like a compilation stroke greatest hits of the band's entire body of work for Virgin between 1973 and 1983. Now, the reason I'll say it's controversial, and maybe the reason that it's not on there, is that there is every track that's on here has been remixed or re-recorded in 1994. So Edgar Froese, who by then was the only member who'd been in the band all the way through, had probably cut a deal with Virgin for previously unreleased versions of these songs, and so therefore added overdubs, edits and remixes to 4 CDs of it. CD 4, by the way, CD 4 and 5 are the real interesting ones here. So CD 4 is all soundtrack material. So for example, it is soundtrack material from Flashpoint, from Sorcerer, from Firestarter, from Thief, from Risky Business. We're all on here. And this is pretty much the most available CD version for Flashpoint, Wavelength and Firestarter, but again remixed or re-recorded, and a number of the tracks were re-recorded in 1994 by Edgar Froese on his own, presumably so that it had such a small resemblance to the original material that it could classify as new and previously unreleased. CD 5 on Tangents is 11 unreleased recordings, although for some reason that's CD3 I just showed you. But the unreleased recordings, there's a track on there called Silver Scale, which is not on this Tangerine Dream Pilots of the Purple Twilight box set. Silver Scale is fantastic. It's like a 12-minute epic that has a number of parts which were actually later just extracted and made into separate parts of separate soundtrack albums. So it's really interesting to see the original song as opposed to the little fragments that were only on the soundtrack albums. So if you're buying all of the Virgin era stuff, I'm afraid to say Tangents is still something that you do need to find if you're a completist. Again, if you're only interested in the albums, buy the multi-disc sets that are about £10 on Amazon, which contain all the officially released contemporaneous albums that the band released at the time. I do wish, in conclusion, that Pilots of Purple Twilight had extra discs in it. I wish it had some extra live shows of which 6 exist, 7 in releasable quality. I wish it had Pergamon on it. I wish it had Flashpoint, Firestarter, Wavelength on there as well, but it doesn't. The Tangerine Dream discography is still extremely very complicated indeed. If you're hoping to get the best of the band's classic years, I think this box set and In Search of Hades really cover 95% of the best stuff that the band have released. The next video I'm going to do, I'm going to be quite bitchy about the band's slow descent into irrelevancy. But what I will say is Pilots of Purple Twilight is very, very good. It's not quite complete for contractual reasons. It could really benefit from having those 6 extra live shows in, and those soundtrack albums which I've mentioned, and maybe the extra material which is on Tangents, maybe the remixes that are on Tangents as well. So you do have to go a little bit further. It's not the definitive, comprehensive, absolutely everything ever box set, but this and In Search of Hades are more than adequate for the vast majority of people that want to listen to this band and their classic period. There's a couple of great albums which the band released afterwards. I'm going to touch upon those in the next episode. I'm going to give you a ranking of my top 3 favourite Tangerine Dream albums as well, and explain why I've chosen those. But first I'm going to have a cuppa, I'm going to stop talking, and I'm going to see you soon. Thank you for your time and your interest, and I don't know where you're watching this, I don't know what you're doing while you're watching this. I tend to watch YouTube videos whilst I'm doing housework, actually, washing up, filing, clothes, that type of stuff, and it's really good to keep my higher brain functions interested whilst I'm doing stuff with my hands that isn't that interesting, like sorting out, this is all the socks, this is all the pants, this is all the all the forks. Obviously I don't put the forks and the socks next to each other, but we have to do that stuff. I'm going to wrap up here. It's Saturday the 21st of November 2020. If you'd have told me 29 years ago, 21st of November 1991, this is what I'd be doing 29 years later, I wouldn't have believed you. I wouldn't have. I'd be like, firstly, mate, what's the internet? Secondly, what's a mobile phone? Thirdly, you've got a camera and a movie studio in your mobile phone? And I can broadcast to people anywhere on my own kind of internet. Whoa! And anyway, I'm going to stop there because I sound like an old man yelling at clouds, and instead I'm just going to wrap up, and thanks for spending some time with me whilst I talk through parts of my record collection. There are still about 200 bands I love I haven't even touched upon, and depending on how long lockdown's going to go, I might even get to the end of talking about all of those. Anyway, thank you. Questions, comments, anything like that, again, put them underneath in the YouTube. Say things to me on Twitter, subscribe to me on the channel. I'm just going to keep talking until I get bored with myself, and since I have to spend all of my life with me, that might take some time yet to come. Thank you, and bye.